This video is going to be for September 13th, September 14th. Today we're looking at transforming sine and cosine, specifically what's going to happen if we multiply our parent function by a value. Hopefully we see that today. And then on probably the second video, we will actually look at how we can apply that and graph these functions. But here, I pretty much gave students these notes at the start. And what's happening here is this dotted line is the parent function for cosine. And the blue line this is the function -2 cosine x. And so what I did is I looked at these values, these key values that we have on our graph, and in terms of the relationship between cosine. So for example, if we plug in 0 into -2 cosine of x, then we get -2 times cosine of 0. But from the unit circle, because I'm taking this x value, putting it there, from the unit circle, cosine of 0 is 1. So we have -2 times 1, which would be -2, which is why we get this point here at 0, -2. And similar situation for all of these. Like if I plug in pi over 2, cosine of pi over 2 would give us 0. -2 times 0 is 0. So that's there. And hopefully what we notice is there's some things that changed. Our domain stayed the same. It's still -infinity to infinity because the function continues forever in both directions. There's nothing defined anywhere in between -infinity to infinity. The range, however, did change. Now, instead of from -1 to 1, which is our cosine parent function, the actual function, by multiplying by this -2, it changed the range so that the lowest value it's going to go to is -2, and the highest value it goes to is 2. So our range is -2 to 2 now. And the reason that changed is because by multiplying by -2, hopefully we can see that from the middle of our function, which because we're not moving it up or down, the middle of our function still is here at the x-axis. From the middle to the highest point, that distance, that is now 2. Similar here, from the middle of our function to the bottom of the function, or the bottom of the wave, that distance is 2 as well. So the range changed, but more specifically, what's really changing the range is this amplitude change. Our amplitude changed to 2 here. And notice here, by multiplying by our function by a factor of -2 here, the period stayed the same. So here I'm at -2, I'm going up, I go down, and I get back here, or in other words, it's repeating at 2 pi. And in class, we talked about what's happening here, what's changing. And what's happening is because we're multiplying our parent function, in this case cosine, by -2, that changed the entire amplitude to 2. What also changed is, notice here, our cosine function started in on the positive y-axis. It goes down, it's negative, goes up, it's positive. But by multiplying by this -2, instead of starting positive, it now starts negative, works its way positive, then goes negative. And so what's happening here is that with -2 cosine of x, this 2, that's changing our amplitude. So anytime we're multiplying our parent function by a value, that's going to change the amplitude. That's going to stretch our function by that factor. And if the value is negative, then that's going to cause a reflection. It's going to reflect across the x-axis. So again, if we multiply our parent function, not the x value, saw what the x value in previous classes, what changes, but if we multiply our parent function by a value, this value here is going to cause the amplitude to change, and if it's negative, it's going to reflect across the x-axis. So let's take a look. Let's suppose if we had, instead of -2 cosine x, we had 2 cosine x, 1/2 cosine x. Well, what's going to happen here is this 2, again, because we're multiplying our parent function by value, that's going to cause the amplitude to change, and so our new amplitude is now 2. Is it going to reflect? No, there is no reflection because that 2 is positive, it's not negative. So there is no reflection here. Similarly, here, because we're multiplying by 1/2, again, our amplitude changes. So our amplitude changes from 1 to 1/2 because we're multiplying our parent function by a value. And there is no reflection since that value is positive. And we're going to see how to graph that here in a second. But in general, any function, whether it's a sine of x or a cosine of x, the thing is, if we're multiplying our parent function by this value of a, then the amplitude changes, and it's going to equal the absolute value of a. Meaning, if this is positive, if we're multiplying by a positive value like we did here, that value stays positive. However, if we multiply our parent function by a negative value like we did here, the amplitude is positive 2, meaning we're taking the absolute value of -2 to change the amplitude. And if a is negative, which being less than 0, that's what's happening, then the function will reflect across the x-axis. And that's the biggest transformation. This thing that if we multiply our parent functions by a value, then what's going to happen is the amplitude is going to change, and if that value is negative, then the function will also reflect across the x-axis. I'm going to end this video here. If you need to rewind, ask questions, please feel free to do so through the Remind app, website, in class, whatever helps you. On the next video, we're going to see how we can actually apply this and graph these functions.